Rabbi, are you going to be in shul today?
I don't think so, Daniel. Why?
I wanted to sell my chametz.
We'll do it tonight.
Okay.
All right. This is going to be Mamash Gavaldik. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shekalim, Daf, Zayim. We're going to continue to learn more about the rule that we had in the Mishnah and Avav and Beis, that when you have surplus money of an item that has in it a carbon chatos, so that money has to be used like we call a carbon oilas nedava or kates mizbeach, and we're going to have a lot more details regarding that halacha. That's going to lead us all the way into the fifth Mishnah of the Perek. The fifth Mishnah of the Perek, as we mentioned, will continue to discuss what do we do not with surplus of money that was designated for karbanos, but surplus of money that was designated for various tzedakah funds. And there's extra money. Exactly what should or what should not that money be used for? That's going to lead us into also money that was raised for a burial. Whether if there's extra money, whether you can make a nicer matzeva, a nicer monument, and that's going to lead us into a little bit of agadata that ein oisin refashes la tzadikim, that tzadikim don't need to have such monuments. And as we'll speak out, there's two parts of a matzeva. One is for the glory or for the honor of the mace, and one is for the living people, for them to know exactly where to go to daven for themselves and to ask the person who passed away to daven on their behalf. And it is only the latter that tzaddikim need, because for themselves, as we learn, that the Torah that we learn in their name is the greatest matzeva, is the greatest monument. We're going to have a very famous story between Rabbi Zajac and his Talmud, the Amoira Rabbi Zajac ben Pedas, who sometimes did not always quote the teachings that he heard from Rabbi Zajac in the name of his teacher, how initially Rabbi Zajac was upset and later he was appeased. We're going to learn the rule that Talmud Chacham sho'emrim b'halacha mipev ba'olam hazeh, even after his physical passing, Sifasav or Sitsoitsav, Roy Chashois, Imoy recovered that his lips move in the kever, and that is something that he tremendously benefits from. We also will be learning about the importance of seeing the face of the teacher as he teaches. And then when we review his learning, to remember the face of the teacher. And God willing, we're going to start the third chapter. The third chapter in Shekalim, it's small chapters. We'll speak now about the Trumas Halishka. In other words, until now, we were speaking about everyone's mitzvah obligation to donate a half a shekel. That half a shekel ideally should make its way into the Beis HaMikdash by Rosh Chodesh Nisan, even though we also learned that if it does not, whenever the gizbar, when the administrator,
I feel so lucky you're my wife.
When the administrator was the one that removed the shekalim from the lishka, he had in mind to remove it, not only for the money that was already there, but even for the money that's being sent there, even for the money that's going to be given. Once it's given and it gets there, then retroactively everyone is connected to the Trumas HaLishka. The Trumas HaLishka itself was actually done 3 times a year. We're going to learn more details, how it was done and when were those 3 times, why dafka on those 3 times. And then the Mishnah is going to make a link between the 3 times a year of the Trumas HaLishka removal to another Gavaldik halacha, and that is, we have a whole Nesechta B'Chodesh speaking about that. When we have born into our flock of either bakar v'tzayin, which are cattle, sheep or goats, animals, then we have to gather those animals and we have to separate a tent. And the way it's done is that the animals are gathered into a dir, into an enclosed area that only has one narrow exit, and we push the animals out, we inspire them to go out, and we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And when the 10th one passes through the door, then we paint the back of that animal with a red dye, with sikra, and we declare that the 10th one is holy to God, even though it's really, the kedusha goes into it automatically. That animal is a carbon. It may be eaten by the owner. It belongs to the owner, but it becomes kachum kala, ma'aser behema. So when we have animals born into our flock, according to most of the Rishonim, mida oiraisa, before we did the tithing, we can shech one animal and eat it. even though we're missing the opportunity of doing the mitzvah. But midoraisa, it's not tevel. Midrabanan, they said like this, that there are 3 times in the year that when that time comes, that we should gather all of the animals that were born between the prior time and this time, and we should separate the truma, the ma'aser behema. And if we do not do so, then midrabanan, we consider all of these animals tevel midrabanan. When are those 3 times called a goyden in which the Chachamim enacted for us to separate the ma'aser behema? Exactly, according to some opinions, the same 3 times that the Trumas Halishka was done in the Beis HaMikdash. However, there are various opinions regarding this final statement that we just made, and much, much more. Chavra, let us start. We left off on the Vav, on the base, Mamash, at the end of the Amid by the 2 dots. We are referring back to the Mishnah that Moiser Nazir, that if a Nazir separated for himself money that is to be used for the karbanos that a Nazir has to bring when his days of the Zirus end, which are Chatos, Oila, and Shlamim. So therefore, the Mishnah said that Lina Dava. So it says, and the way we learned the Mishnah is based on the rule that the Mishnah gave, that Kol Shehu Balushum, Chatos, Mishum Hashama, if there's a surplus of money, it has to be brought Nedava. So since one of the 3 karbanis that a Nazir has to bring is a Chatos, so therefore it makes sense that the surplus of money also goes Linadava. Says the Gemara Daf Chizda, turning to Daf Zayin Amadal of Amar, that for who this is only said that Shekarava Chatosoi Basoif, that the way the Nazir used the money that he previously designated and he actually bought his karbanis is that first he went out of the order, but first he bought, let's say, a shlamim, and then he bought an oila, even though normally a chatos should be brought always before the oila, but it is not essential. And if the last money that he used was for the chatos and now there's surplus, so we consider the surplus of the chatos, which is why we say that Meiser Nazir Linadava. But if he followed the correct order, first he bought money for a chatos, then he bought money for an oila, and now the final money was for a shlamim, and he bought the shlamim, and now there's leftover money. So we consider that not Meiser chatos, but Meiser shlamim, and we also learned in the Mishnah that Meisaran shlamim, that the surplus money is actually used for a shlamim, as is the rule with any Moisar Shlamim. So holds Rab Chizda. However, Amar Rab Zajac, no. Afilu kar b'shlamim basoif, even if shlamim was bought last, still halacha achasi b'nazir that shetehei Moisar nedava. And the way we can word it is that the money was first separated to buy all of the karbanos, including achatos. So if there's surplus of money, we don't view it surplus from the last one that you bought. No, it's surplus from all of the money designated, also from achatos. So nedava says the Gemara Masnisa Masayah L'Dain. There is a brayso that will substantiate, that will be a shiur to one of these 2 amirim, to either Rab Chizda, and then a Masnisa Masayah L'Dain. So this machlokes Amoraim is really a machlokes Tanaim, and now the Gemara quotes the braysos. Masnisa Masayah L'Rab Zajac, that it's always, the latter one is always, the money, the moisture is always used L'Dava. It says in a brayso, Elu Hein Ma'ois Sasumen, we're speaking, the brayso speaking about a person that designated money. But B'chayav, the Nazir, never designated this part will go for this one, for a chatos, this part for an oila. It's a whole bag of money, and it's called unspecified money. It was for all his karbanis, and then the Nazir passes away. So and the din then will be, the brayso says that all of the money has to go linadava. So says the brayso, kol shedemei chatos mu'urabis bahem, va'afilu hitrish demei chatos. Wow. So if he initially designated money for all of his karbanis, even if before the Nazir passed away already took out the money that he wants to use for the chatos, so the unspecified money now is really only an oila and a shlamim, and then the Nazir passes away. Here we still say that what? That the moiser mois, or these monies, should all be used linadav. They are considered mois sumenain. Now the question will be why? If he already separated the money for the chatos, so the leftover money is only either la'oila or l'shlamim. There's no chatos here. So why do we say that my son is l'dava? So as we will learn that this brayso holds, and subsequently Rab Zajac, that it's not only or not dafka that if money that was designated for a chatos, it should be used l'nadava. Any monies that's kachin should be used l'nadava. Now chatos is kachin, asham is kachin. If you have oila and shlamim money, well, I know that shlamim is kachin, but oila is kachin. So since there is some kache money left over, then we say that what? That we saw him linodava as well, and also mastisa masayel Rav Chisda, but Isa will substantiate the sheet of Rav Chisda, and here we quote it, but Isa elu lechatasi. If he says this money is for my chatos, and bahashad, the remaining money should be l'sha'ad nezirus, should be for the oila, and for the shlamim umeis, and he passes away. Now we're going to go me'inyan le'inyan, and as we learned in the Saktas Me'ilah, ironically that kache kalim, right? On what do you have me'ila on kache kalim? Only that which is mikache Hashem, as we have in Parshas Vayikra that we just read yesterday. So since we also have part of the kache kalim, there is no me'ila on kache kalim. Now, when you take a carbon and you shecht it, so the parts now of the blood or of the chalavim, the evarim that go on the mizbeach, yeah, on that there is me'ila. But by kache animals, even before you shecht it, it's all kache Hashem exclusively, and there is me'ila. So if you have money that is both oila and shlamim, again, oila is kache shlamim is kache kalim. So the din is mo'alim b'kulam ve'ema alim b'mitzasim. When are you chayiv me'ila? Only if you used all of the money. If you used only some of the money, then we say the money that you used was from the shlamim. The money that you used was from kache kalim, and therefore there is no me'ila. Okay, so what do we see from over here? What do we see from over here? How does that prove Rav Chisda that says that only if chatos was brought at the end, only there is moisarim lenadava, because according to this brayso, when it comes applying the same logic to the rules of moisar, if you have some leftover money, why would you say that leftover money came from the chatos? No, we will consider that money leftover money if you have from the shlamim, if the shlamim was the last one that you designated. And therefore, we'll say that moisar shlamim is shlamim. Says the Gemara, v'loy amar imeis yiplu lenadava. Oh, and the Brayso does not say that if the person passed away, that it goes linadava. We don't say that. Even though there is oil money in there. Doesn't matter. We don't view it that way. Because this Brayso will hold the way we learned that it has to be dafka chatos money, and we don't consider all of it having in it some of that. No. So therefore, again, the limits the din of the Mishnah, that when do we say that moiser nazir linadava? Only when, if the last carbon that was brought by the nazir was the chatos, and only then do we view the remaining money, the surplus from the last one that was brought. Says the Gemara. Rav Chisda says moiser lach moishal nazir, that if a nazir separated breads or money to buy the 40 breads that come with a carbon nazir, and now you have either leftover money for those breads or the breads themselves, so yurkav, they have to be left to decompose. There's nothing you can do with it. And Amar Rabbi Yosi via ois. Rabbi Chisda is correct. Why? Because you can't just bring it by yourselves. Because breads come together with a carbon. Now, in the zirus acheres, to give it to another nazir, right? Or even to his own other nazirus, that also doesn't work. Because ein at yachol, she'ein l'cha nazirus ba'av lechem, every time a nazir undertakes to become a nazir, he automatically becomes obligated with that vow to bring at the end the 3 karbanos. And we're speaking here about a nazir. I'm sorry, not a toida. A nazir brings 20 loaves of bread, not the 40, but it groups 10 and 10, and he automatically is mechoyev to separate 20 loaves of bread. It comes with a nazirus offering. So therefore, lefum came sarach meimar moiser lach moishal nazir is yurkav nikuda. Says the Gemara that sovereign meimar. That means that the Bnei Yeshiva thought to say that hu lachma hu moiser nesachal, just like Rav Chisda ruled that moiser lechem lachmei nazir have to be let to decompose if there is money that was designated for the nesachim that is brought with the wine libations that is brought together with the karbanos of the nazir. If you have left over, they should also be left to decompose. There's nothing you can do with it. However, Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Rabbi Bun, no, moiser nesachav is kachi inun. And therefore, the yipul in a dava. And this is exactly like the shita that we just brought in from the Brayso, that it's not only moisar chatos that goes in a dava. It's really about it being kache. So therefore, we include this as moisar kache, and therefore in a dava. And the Gemara therefore says that al date the Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Bun, that according to this final statement, right, that that it's not about the chatos aspect, it's about the kachim kachim aspect. Oy bazoi, that the following three Amirayim shared the same opinion. Then Shmuel and Rab Chizda and Rabbi Lazar, that's how we'll be the Girsa. Rab Chizda, aha, the Amaran, that Moisen Nesachim is going to be used for Nedava, because even he will subscribe that if you have Moisad from Kachet Kachin, it goes Linadava. And that's why on top of the Amid, the emphasis of Rab Chizda was that if the last thing that you brought was Shlamim, then we say that Moisad is Shlamim, because Shlamim is Kachet Kalim. Shmuel, the Amar Rabbi Yossi, as we had in the beginning of the Sugya and Abava Amid Beis, and what did we have at the beginning of the Gemara? That Atanon Taman, while I was there in Babel, Shamis called Rabbi Yehuda, that asked of his teacher Shmuel, if he frisch Shkola Ivames. Remember, that's how the Gemara began. What do you do with that shekel? And Amalei Yipul in a Dava. Why Yipul in a Dava? So when we learned the Sugya, the Pshat is because in the Korbanei Sibur you have a Chatos. He understands it's more than that. That the Korbanei Sibur is even the oil, it's all kachem. Since it's kachem money, that's why we say yipul in a dava. And Rabbi Lazar is the one that says that Moisa asidus ho'efa shaloi. What happens with the kohen gadol if he has extra money that he designated for his daily asidus ho'efa? And as we learned that our Mishnah was only speaking about this unique case of the asidus ho'efa, right, of the minchas choit, of the korban oil of the yoyed, the three cases we have at the end of Parshas Vayikra. But what about the kohen gadol? And there was a machlokes. Rabbi Yochanan says Yelichem le'yam hamelech, which is Yurkav, and Rabbi Lazar says yitlul in a dava. So when we learned the Gemara last time, we said because there's a pasuk somewhere that calls the daily flour offering of the kohen gadol achatos. No, not because of that. Because they also ascribe to this broader rule, not the way we learned the Pshat in the Mishnah, that it's only Moisa Chatos that goes Linadava. It's Moisa of any Kachin that goes Linadava. That goes Linadava.
Rabbi, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes.
Amen. With the Nesachim, when it falls for Nedava usually means that it goes for the oilers for the Ketzim Mizbeach, right?
The oil means it goes the oil Ketzim Mizbeach, yes.
So what do they do with this libation? They sell it and then they use that to buy animals, or?
Yes. They would sell it. They would sell it and make it into money. In other words, it was all of these are gavalik edinim. Something that was meant to go on the mizbeach as a carbon can only be sold if it has a blemish. Unlike this is not it's taken a sachem, but it doesn't have that level of kedusha that you have to wait for it to get blemished. You just sell it, and you redeem the money, and with the money you put it into the kasa of Keitz HaMizbeach. All right, Chadra, moving on to the next Mishnah. This Mishnah is not kachim related. This Mishnah is already a very practical halacha l'maisa of what we do with surplus from any tzedakah money. Says the Mishnah, Moisa Shavuyim, if you raised money to redeem captives, so then Shavuyim. In other words, even if the fundraiser was because someone was held captive, as long as the fundraisers didn't say it's for Chaim Yankel, it says this is to redeem captives. So you use what you need for this one, and then the surplus you use only for redeeming any other captives. Moisa Shavui, but if you raise the money specifically for a individual that was held captive, and you redeemed him, so this says the Mishnah that their surplus, if there is surplus of the money, has to be used la'asui shavui for that captive, not to redeem him. You give it to him for him to buy food, for him to pay rent. Those people gave the money for him, and they know lechatchila that if there'll be extra money, they want the money to go to him. Next,
what's a captive?
I'm sorry.
What's a captive? What would be a person who's a captive?
A captive is a person that was either kidnapped by bandits, or then the government. Many governments were anti-Semitic governments. They kidnapped a Jew. Today, Hamas kidnapped Gilad, and now sometimes you have to bribe them with money.
I understand.
And if you
Thank
raise money for that individual, it's very important. So then if there's surplus of money, you can't save it for another potential captive. No, it was raised for him, then give him the money. Likewise, if money was raised in general for poor and there's extra money, so what? So if it's not needed now, keep it in the account and use it in the future for other poor people. However, again, if money was raised for a ani, for a specific person, it must be used for that ani. And you don't say, well, we raised that much money, he's no longer an ani. We raised $1 million, or you're going to give it all to him? Yes, because the donors gave it to that individual. If money was raised for dead, which means for the burial needs, so then even if people understood they made the fundraiser because of a current need, if it was raised for Mason, then it can be used for other Mason. But now here it's interesting. What happens if they raise money for a specific Mason? So the Mishnah says, Li Yarshav, the surplus of money goes to his heirs. Why is that? Now really we'll see this is a machlokes. And as the Koren Ha'eda explains, that when money is raised for an individual, there's a certain amount of shame that a person feels. A mace, the person, had he been alive, would have forgiven the shame, knowing that the money will go to his heirs. He's Michael the shame. Abi, my heir, should have more money. And we don't say if the burial needs costed $1,000 and we raised that $2,000, so we covered the expenses. The remaining money goes to his heirs. However, Rav Meir has a doubt. Now, what would be the other option? There is another option. When it comes to burials, so even though there's a standard price for a burial, but then let's speak specifically about a mausoleum or a fancy matzeva or an oil. You can build something beautiful on the grave. So even if the standard is not to build something that expensive, maybe if there's a surplus of money, it should go for the mace. Build a beautiful matzeva. But Rav Meir, why? Because he there was the shame of raising money for him. Maybe he wants for that money to. He already underwent the shame, so I want the money. Rav Meir doesn't know what to do with it. So what does he say? Moiser hameis yehei munach achiyav Elyahu. You use from that fund the basics, and the surplus of money, you don't use it to buy a nicer matzeva, nor do you give it to the heirs because there's a doubt who it goes to. So here we have the rule: you leave the money waiting until Aliyah Hanavi comes. Aliyah Hanavi is the one that's going to resolve all the doubts that we cannot resolve when Mashiach will come. My Zayda always used to say, "Mi is the geld." That throughout all of the history, there's so many cases where the Mishnah paskins, the money should be in the Beis Din until Aliyah Hanavi comes. So imagine until now how much money was accumulated and exactly where is that money? That's a good kasha. Now Nassan, he goes to the other side. He doesn't have a doubt. He goes to the other side of the Tanach. He says, no, you build the nefesh on the cave. Now it's amazing that the word that the Mishnah uses for a monument or for a beautiful tombstone or for some sort of building is called a nefesh. Now we know this based on the letter that Alter Rebbe wrote, right? For the passing, the famous letter, how tzaddikim are more in the world now after the passing than before, according to Zohar. But there, when we learn the letter, we become familiarized that there are many levels to the neshama. And after a passing, so you have the neshama goes to Gan Eden. The ruach is able to go up and come down. The nefesh remains with the remains of the body. Then there's a letter of the Rebbe. The Rebbe says that the yechida also remains here with the body. But just interesting. So al pi Kabbalah, the nefesh level of the soul stays with the remains of the body. So therefore, they would call any monument, including the simple matzeva that's built for the mace, they would call it a nefesh, another place in which the nefesh is connected. And we have other sugyas in Shas that when we go to visit them, that they are aware of it, or at least they are notified who came, what they asked for, and more pratim in the Gemara. Okay, says the Gemara, Gabul loy, that if there was a specific fundraiser, and the only reason why they made the fundraiser was because the cheskasha in, like they thought he has no money. And then the nimtza sheyesh loy, and then we discover, right, we're speaking about a mace. They thought that the deceased had no money. None of the money was needed. And we discover now that there was money. So Rabbi Yirmiyah Savar Meiman, that what he wanted to pass like the Tanakama, the same concept, whenever there is a zilusa, which is a fundraiser for a specific person, the person agrees to it, presumption, halachic chazaka, because he wants the money to go to his heirs. So Moiser Hameis Li Yarsha. Now here, what will be the alternative? The alternative will be not to buy a mausoleum, to give the money back to the donors. Like there was no need. Think about what you said. And as the Tiklin Chadatin explains, mainly in the case of the Mishnah, where there was taka and need, Elamah, they raised more than the need. Okay? But if there was never a need to begin with, the way we'll learn the pshat over here is that the whole donation was given on a erroneous presumption, and the monies here should be returned to their donors. Amalei, so to which Rabbi Yirmiyah said that when I suggested Moiser Hameis Liyarshav, I really did not mean to give that as a clear-cut psagdin. I was wondering whether you say it. Was I had a doubt? Anoli Omnis, I didn't say it as a definitive ruling. I just brought up maybe. When you challenged me, the challenge that Rabbi Idi had was definitely not. He was certain. How are you so certain? He says, At Minolan, that I'm for sure wrong. That was the back and forth. Now the Gemara says, Tani B'Shem Rab Nasan. And this is going back to a Braisa that is elaborating the Mishnah. The Mishnah, all the Mishnah says is that if you raised money for a specific deceased person, not the case of the Gemara. There was a need, but they ended up raising a lot more than the need. So Rav Nasan, not like Rav Meir, who has a suffix, not like the Tanakama that says for sure it should go to the heirs. Rav Nasan says that this money should be used to build a more beautiful monument. Adds the Braisa another detail. That's the system of the Braisa. It doesn't only mean something that stays forever. You would think, because you're building a matzeva, and no, there are certain needs that add to the glory of the mace that are used up right away. For example, the Yasaloi Ziluf al Gaben Mitasan. Ziluf is something that we learn a lot about in Shas, not only Benegeya mace. We had, they used to have earthen floors, and they would have to every now and then water the floors to keep the dust down. But if they used wine, aromatic wine, then not only did it, so to say, clean up the room, but it gave a good aroma. Ziluf. And many times, even though without getting into Pasha Chaval Azman, but we have by Yidden, we're not allowed to bring flowers to a funeral. It's asur. We're not allowed to plant grass on top of a burial spot. If it grows by itself, it's fine. All of that is because the goyim would bring flowers. And why? Because they would not bury the mace immediately, and a body decomposes, right? This is before the refrigeration. So they did not rush to bury, but to counter the bad odor, they would bring flowers and other things that would give a good aroma. And since it's that important to bury the mace ASAP, so Chachamim prohibited bringing flowers. Amazing. Nevertheless, ziluf was allowed. So there were certain practices. Ziluf is something today you see by the Persians here in Los Angeles, that I'm not talking about the flowers that they don't know the halacha, so they bring flowers, but they do ziluf. They bring that rose water and they throw a gallon of roses. That was the ziluf. That's something that we're allowed to do. It should be a good smell. So even though it's not something that lasts, but if you have extra money, then the kudah is don't use it for the heirs, use it for the mace. You can buy a monument, you can do ziluf. Any add-on burial expense should be used from that money. Says the Gemara Tani. We learned in the Braisa, Ein Poitin Shavu B'Shavu, that Ein Poitin Shavu B'Shavu, that if you raised money for Shavu number one specifically, and the money was succeeded, you redeemed that Shavu. You cannot say, well, I'm not going to give the money back to the donors, but there's no need. Let me save the money for someone else. Guys, that was the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, we learned that Moisés Shavuyim, if you raised it lachatchila without a specific recipient, then you can go and pass on the money to whoever is a shavui. Here the Braisa says the same thing, that if you raised money for shavui number one, don't use the money for shavui number two. The question is, what do you do with the money? You give it back to the donors. Next, the ein goyven talus b'talus. Same thing. Talus means you were raising money to buy a winter coat for a specific ani, and you bought him the winter coat or any other garment, and now there's surplus of money. You can't buy another cloak. You specified for what you're fundraising. You have to use it only for that. However, the Braisa already acknowledges is that the tzedakah funds don't behave that way. The fact is that when they raised money for a specific captive, they would use it to redeem another captive. When they raised money for a specific ani, they would use it for another ani. So says the Braisa, don't protest against that. common practice. And as the Koren Publisher explains, is because since the Gaboy Tzedakah, de facto, were not behaving in this limited way, so people know about that. They know about that. So there was a certain time period where it was a wrong thing to do. But once it became the standard practice, now every time you give money, even though you're giving it for a specific poor person, you already know that if there's going to be a surplus of money, they will use it for an ani. No, it's talus for a talus, shavi for a shavi, but you don't have to be that loyal to that specific individual. Gewaldig. Says the Gemara Tani, that's by Goyman. Hey, ois in the Pashas Letzadikim. Another concept. Now, when we were learning in the Mishnah, that if you raised more than you needed, so the option of Rav Nosson is build a big monument. You can use it for something that's beyond the standard. So on that, says Rashbag, you don't make for a tzaddik any type of monument that is beyond the norm. Why? Because because their words, the Torah that they leave, that we have the merit to learn, is their greatest monument. When the Ksaf Soifer was involved in the burial of his great father, the Hassan Soifer, and they built a beautiful, big, as we know, for tzaddikim, you make something special. So he spoke about this din. He says, why are we doing it? That Rashbak says that because the so he explained what we spoke on in the intro, that you have the concept of building a monument for the honor of the mace. That tzaddik doesn't need that honor, does not need that honor. Because whenever you learn his Torah, or let me word it differently, when you go to a Beis HaChaim and you are davening, there are two opposite prayers. There are people that go there and they daven for the mace, and that's why you have a monument. You should know where to go to daven for them. Tzaddikim don't need for you to daven for them. By the tzaddik, it's pum fakert. You go to the burial spot, you're asking the tzaddik to daven for you. Oh, for that, we want more people to know where the tzaddik is. So the greater the monument, more people will come and they will benefit from it. So explained the Ksaf Soifer when they were involved in the building of a very unusually large and beautiful mausoleum for the Ksaf Soifer and the Kach Min Hagenu. It's not about the beauty, but we can make a special spot by every tzaddik, not for them. You want to elevate their neshama, learn their Torah. But for you, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan, have a mismech v'ozal a'ol Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Rabbi Yechanan was at a time in his life, he had a hard time walking, and when he walked, he needed to lean on Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So therefore, Rabbi Chia bar Abba was like his shamish, and he was zoicha to see various interactions between Rabbi Yechanan and others. Now, what happened was, Rabbi Eliezer, guys, this Rabbi Eliezer is whom we call Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas. Rabbi Lazar ben Pedas, as we'll see, was a, Talmud Chaver, but he was a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan, that Chamile umekamer lemekame. Mama's classical, at least by us and Lubavitch behavior. He did not want for the tzaddik to see him. Not only did he not greet him, he didn't want for Rabbi Yechanan to see him. Hasidim were uncomfortable for the Rebbe to look at them. So he hid. And Rabbi Yechanan felt slighted. Since not only did his student not greet him, now again, by us, when we walk by the Rebbe, we're not going to disturb the Rebbe with a shalom aleichem. We're disturbing him, right? If the Rebbe would greet us, it's gavaldik. But that was the Mal Gavaldik story. So Rabbi Lazar felt that the way he was machabed, this teacher, was not only not to go and, how are you, shalom aleichem, he hid from his teacher. And Rabbi Yechanan noticed Rabbi Lazar hiding from him, and being that he was leaning on Rabbi Chia bar Abba, he told Rabbi Chia bar Abba his displeasure of that behavior. Halein, this one, Rabbi Lazar, talk to me layu. I have two kindness on him. Number one, Hadein Bavla Avedi. Talk to me layu, Hadein Bavla Avedi. Two things this Babylonian, that's what he called it, Rabbi Lazar, ben Pedas, is doing wrong to me. Number one, the Lishal Bishlemik, he didn't greet me. And number two, not only did he not greet me, why is he hiding? The Chadar Mitmar. So Amalei Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi, now Rabbi Chia, his shamish, didn't say anything. But someone else heard that, and they were trying to appease Rabbi Yechanan. So Rabbi Yaakov tells Rabbi Yechanan, no. He's you called him a Babylonian. Exactly. He did that to honor you. Kach nehigin gaboin but because Rabbi Yaakov was also a bubble maker. He says, that the Zeira is not Rabbi Zeira. Zeira means a person of lesser stature. The Zeira loishol b'shloime derabba. That if a Talmud goes by his teacher, no, the teacher takes the initiative if the teacher wants. But if not, the way we honor our Rebbe is by not initiating the conversation. The Inun the Hagin umekaimen, because we fulfill the following verse that when youngsters will see me, they'll hide from me. It's only the Yeshishim Kamu Amadu, it's only the elders that have their, so to say, the right to interact. So therefore, Amalahu, or Amalei, Maulima Evar Kame da Adoira Tsalme. He asked them the following. First of all, number one is we don't initiate the greeting. And now he said number two. There was a certain Avodah Zarah in their area that was called the Adoira idol. That Goyim built. When a Yid walked by it, what did a Jew do? What do you think a Jew did? He ignored it. When you ignore it, you show that you're not being mechaber. What he wanted to show him that if you walk by someone and you don't greet them, you dishonor them. So since we don't initiate a greeting because Rabbi Zajac considers you the great one, he considered himself the little one. So therefore, if he can't greet you, he can't walk by you because that in itself is a disrespect. So therefore, he hid from you. Can you walk by the idol? He says, Amalei ma'at palig le'yikadu. Why can you not walk by the idol? What honor do you give by walking by the idol and not greeting? Rabbi Yechon says, Adarab, if you walk by the idol and you don't acknowledge it, you give it, you brush it off with the cold shoulder, fakir, you're mavaze it. So now, avoid kamoi v'sameyene, says Rabbi Yechon, walk by it and blind its eyes, meaning walk by it and don't acknowledge it. So Amalei, so therefore, this is all how Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi was trying to accommodate Rabbi Yechanan. Now you understand why the Shlokish doesn't greet you. Rabbi Eliezer Ovid, Kamach. Because since he's a Babylonian and he's not going to give you a Shalom Aleichem, so walking by you and saying nothing is abada not an option. That's disrespect to you. So Rabbi Yechanan tells Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi, and this is the emes and everything. But I told you wasn't the real reason why I was upset. If that would have been the only reason, then what you're saying is good. I have another taina on Abelazar. And what's the real taina? You know what else he really does? There's another problem. 3 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Many times he quotes my taina, but he doesn't quote it that he heard it from me. And this was such a big taina that Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi was unable to appease Rabbi Yechanan. And as we know that when a great tzaddik has a kpeda, when he's upset, it can have a non-positive effect. So the chavedim of Rabbi Elazar were concerned when they realized that Rabbi Yechanan is upset at Rabbi Elazar. So Nichnas Tulafanav, like we just mentioned, also that Rabbi Ami and Abasi were also Tamidei Rabbi Yechanan. Nichnas Rabbi Ami and Abasi and Amru Loi, and they told him Rebbe, meaning Rabbi Yechanan. Listen, Rebbe, you're angry. Anger in itself is the end of the world. So happened in the coppersmith's shul. It was common that people of the same profession, right today, they sit at the same table, or then they would have their own shuls, that there was the whole sugya that we learned to Masechta Shabbos, if you remember, regarding binyan arai, oyel arai, binyan arai. So they would have certain rods that they would stick in the ground to help the door remain open or closed. Question is, are you allowed to do it? Is that called binyan arai? So there was a scenario where there was this neged, that there was this bolt, this piece of wood that had on top of it, that had on top of it a knob. Now, people also would use that neged with the glustera as a pestle. In other words, it was a dual purpose function utensil. So when you put something in the ground and it's only meant to wedge the door in its place, then you might leave it there for a longer amount of time, which as far as Hilchos Shabbos is concerned, it's a bigger problem. If you have a utensil that aside of it being good as a neged, it's also good as a pestle, which means that it's likely that you're going to remove it sooner than later, which means what you did is of lesser kiyum. That's lesser of a problem. So there's a machlokes tanaim. The neged sheyesh bo yiglusla shenech l'kol chevet av zayin on the base. Rabbi Eliezer, this is already Rabbi Eliezer the Tanach. This is not the Amoyna. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi. Now they lived over there. They lived in Tiberia, and they davened in the shul of the coppersmiths. Maybe they themselves were coppersmiths, or they liked whatever. They davened over there, and they when the Mishnah records the machlokes and Shabbos. But here we're learning a detail that while they were debating that, they tore a Sefer Torah. In other words, each one was showing a Sefer Torah proof to his opinion, and one was schlepping here, one was schlepping there, and it tore. And the words is achikoru. Koru means that they actively tore a Sefer Torah. Why? Because they were angry. They were trying to. Ami Navasi is telling Rabbi Yechanan that listen here, anger is not the solution. Something bad will happen from the anger. So the Gemara right away says, hold on, Koru salkadaitak, that they actively, God forbid, that they tore a Sefer Torah. Another detail, it could be. It wasn't these two Tanoim. It wasn't these two Tanoim. It were Yidden in that shul. Some of them sided with Rabbi Eliezer, others sided with Rabbi Yossi. Some of that happened. And they're debating, and they tore a Sefer Torah. The Gemara says, no, that Rabbi Yossi, and Ella, that Shenikra Sefer Torah, no one did it intentionally, but because of their machlokes, because of their anger, it was that they got angry. We debate, but don't get angry. A Sefer Torah tore in the process of that debate. And Rabbi Yossi ben Kisma Shemai, and he said to Mehani, I wonder if eventually this home will become an idol worship home. And as we have, the Alter Rebbe quotes in the Geras Chafei, the whole Maimar Chazal that we really have in the Zohar, that the Rambam quotes. That's one of the sources that the Rambam knew the Zohar, that Kol HaKoyes Ki'ilu Oved Akom. That lashon is only in the Zohar, and the Rambam writes that. So Kol HaKoyes Ki'ilu Oved Akom, all of that is, look what happened if you get angry. Don't be angry at your student. You know what? It didn't work. So V'chazar Ba'omar, Gehadein Mechavrein. So he says that B'chazar Ba'omar, Rabbi Yechanan got even more angry. He said, how can you compare this case to that case? We learned good pshat. Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi, they were the ones debating. They were chavedim. So if chavedim have a disagreement, they don't have the right to get angry at each other. That anger was uncalled for, and it led for Sefer Torah to get ripped. And eventually, that place itself became a Beis Avodah Zarah. But I'm not a chaver with Rabbi Elazar. He's my Talmud. Yes, I'm angry with him. Now, this is not good. So they were unable to appease him. Now, as we mentioned before, Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi was engaged with him before. And he really managed to take away the first complaint of Reish Lakish is hiding and not reading. So he got involved again. Nichnas l'fanav Rabbi Yaakov Bar Idi. And Amalei, he tells him... Not
Reish Lakish, Rabbi Elazar.
He was defending Rabbi Elazar. Thank you. He was defending Rabbi Elazar. By the way, Lahoyer, it's a sad story that Reish Lakish passed away from a kapeda from Rabbi Yechanan. If you remember that story. Anyways, over here. Amalei ksiv, kasher tziva Hashem es Moshe Abdoi. Kein tziva Moshe es Yeshua v'goymen. In other words, that Yeshua's Torah came from Moshe Rabbeinu. So he asked him, I don't understand. Do you think every time Yeshua said a Torah, he quoted the Moshe Rabbeinu? The Chikol Dibur v'Dibur Shehoy Yeshua Yoshe v'Doinish Hoya Omer Kach Amar Moshe. Every time he said that Moshe, no, he didn't have to. Elo Yeshua Yoshe v'Doinish. And the Yodim HaKoyel Sha'at Torah Shal Moshe. So he tells Rabbi Yechanan, why are you upset with your Talmud? Adarabah. Rabbi Elazar was so proud of him being a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. Everyone knew that. It's like when we say something, where do we get our Torah? We get our Torah from the Rebbe, if we get it right. You don't have to say, you see, that Chassid, he b'shem the Rebbe. It's self-understood. We are a Talmud of a Rebbe. All of our Torah, that's Taka Torah, is coming from the teachings of our Rebbe. And we don't have to say every time, Azoyet the Rebbe Gezot. It's self-understood. Af Ata, Eliezer, Yoshe v'Doinish. Eliezer is teaching Torah. And Taka, you're right, he doesn't always quote your name. It doesn't matter. And that appeased Rabbi Yechanan. He was told that Rabbi Elazar, he's such a mekusher, Rabbi Elazar, that everyone who sees Rabbi Elazar knew this is a Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. So you know what? His anger was subsided. He was appeased. And not only that, Rabbi Yechanan now turns to Rabami and Abasi, and he had a taina on them. Why did you not appease me like him? Now we have to understand, why was he so angry? Why is it so important for people to quote a teacher? All of this is connected to that a tzaddik doesn't need for himself the mausoleum, the monument, the big matzeva. He doesn't need it because the Torah is his matzeva. The Torah is his nefesh. But Rabbi Yochanan, my kulahai. Why? The answer is because my kulahai, the boye, the yemrun shmaitza mishmei. Why was it so important for him? For people to share his name when they repeat his title. Answers the Gemara. The Av David HaMelech Bikesh Aleh Rachman. He once asked God, as we have in Tehillim Samach Aleph, Agura ba'oilcha ba'oihalecha. I would like to live in your tent, oilamim, forever. David wanted to live forever, and the Gemara understands that request. What do you mean to live forever? I want to take refuge in the shelter of your wings, Selah, again forever. So the Gemara says, it wasn't that he was asking to physically live to forever. No. I want to merit that my word should be said in Beis HaKnesses, Beis HaMedrash, which is exactly what we do. We say the words of David HaMelech's Tehillim. By the way, Tehillim is part of Tanach, but which is Torah. Tehillim is also part of Tefilla. Side of that, we quote David HaMelech the whole time in his Torah. And why did David HaMelech want for his name to be mentioned the whole time? Because as Shimon ben Azira says, in the name of Rabbi Zajac, that Kol Talmud Chacham Sho'omrim Dvar Halacha Mipiv Ba'olam Hazem. Even after the Talmud Chacham passes away, people repeat the Torah in his name. Then Sefasav, that's the nusach here, his lips, Roich HaShois, they move with him in the kever. Whether that means that, as we mentioned, that the nefesh's lips move, whether this also has an effect, begashmias. So once the Rebbe spoke out, and that's something that gives tremendous hana'ah to the person who passed away. And as we especially learn in Hasidus, the uniqueness of Olam Hazeh, that the whole kavana dira betachtonim is Olam Hazeh. Of course, we are closer to a gilui of godliness in Gan Eden, but that's good for us. God wants us to be here. So imagine, let's word it like this: that if we quote a Torah of our Rebbe in his name, or if it's self-understood that it is in his name, so therefore the Rebbe's lips move. So the Rebbe himself is involved in making a dira betachtonim in Olam Hazeh. That's the hana. Shnemen, as it says that the chichef, that your palate is kiyayin hatoy, like good wine. Doivet sifse yishenim, that moves the lips of those who are sleeping. We are comparing the lips of those who are sleeping to wine. What does it mean? If you have a pile, a heap of the grapes after they are pressed, they are very sensitive. And if you touch any part of it, everything bubbles up. That kiven as it right away bubbles. We are so connected to a tzaddik, and as long as we quote him by his name, or if we self-understood that our Torah is in his name, right? Doivet sifsei yeshenim, mamash. That the lips of the Yeshenim, the ones who are sleeping, the ones who passed away, move. Shal tzadikim kimin sho'evim baralach mipiyam. Shal tzadikim sifseiseim merach hashois imoem bekevet. And now the Gemara says, okay, so what? Umaha no yeshloi. So bad mezira amar kadein deshasi koin ditoin. Koin ditoin is a certain type of wine that people have in next daf. It's a wine that has in it spices. It has in it pepper, it has in it honey. The Ben Yehoyada and others explain, the wine refers to the halacha in the Torah. The pepper refers to the pilpul in the Torah. The honey refers to the pnimius HaTorah. All levels of the Torah. That if you drink this type of wine, even after you consumed it, the taste remains in your mouth. In other words, when we repeat a Torah in the name of our Rebbe after the Rebbe's physical passing, the taste of him teaching Ba'olam Hazeh remains in his mouth. And that's Gavaldik, because then he also is still connected to the kavan of the whole Bria, which is to make a dira bitachtoinim. Likewise, Rabbi Yitzchak Omar, he says he doesn't speak about konditoin, kahadein deshasi chamar atik. Anyone who drinks very good wine, the beauty of wine is that even after you consumed it, the taste lingers in your mouth. And the diuk here is that the ikar part of the Torah that makes the dira b'tachtonim taka is the kisra shel Torah, which is halacha. Halacha is connected to wine. So whether you have to quote your Rebbe's piskei dinim in halacha, or whether it's quoting any teaching that the Rebbe gave, whether it's on the level of yayin, whether it's on the level of spices, whether it's on the level of honik, even after you finish drinking it, tama b'puma. So that's why it's so important to quote the name of our teachers. But here again, if it's so clear that we are the Talmud of our Rebbe, then you don't have to say every time. Yeshua didn't say every time, we have to just be careful that we should not make a mistake, because then they will attribute the mistake to our teacher. Okay, right. Says the Gemara Rabbi Zajac. Once we speak about quoting the Torah that we got from our teachers, Rabbi Zajac Amar, just that to be appreciative of the technology, the good that God created, that today we can learn physically distant and we can see each other's faces. That's so important. There are other chazals that are similar. So he said like this, that when you repeat the Torah, when you repeat, not only when you're learning, when you repeat the Torah, envision the face of your teacher. Yira bal shmua ki'ilu oimed lenegdoi. The Rebbe spoke about this. The Rebbe spoke about the fact that by the Mittel Rebbe we don't have a picture. And the Rebbe spoke, how can you have bal shmua ki'ilu oimed kenegdoi? So the emissaries, the Rebbe explains that if you learn enough Torah from the author, you'll see his face in it. But then when you learn, you should look at your teacher's face. When you repeat this Torah, envision his face. Then you'll repeat it correctly. As it says, it's only with the likeness of the person's face. Yishalach here meaning, when we go properly, when we repeat the Torah of our teacher properly, when B'Tselem. And it says, Rav Adam Yikra Ishchazdoi. Rav Adam Yikra Ishchazdoi. That we're speaking about when you share the greatness of a man, that's Shar Kol Adam. So we can share, we can do chesed by sharing someone's Torah. But the Ish Emunim, a man of precision, is harder to find. Meaning that only those who, when they repeat the Torah of their teacher, they envision the pnei of the teacher, then they get it precise. If you disconnect the Torah from the teacher, including the physical tselem of the teacher, then you don't get it precise. Zeh Rabbi Zajac. That refers to what Rabbi Zajac said. The Rabbi Zajac that leitanon or leisnon. Leisnon tzrichin chashashin l'shmaitzi der Rabsheshes. Wow, what a gevudik statement. That if Rabsheshes teaches something and it doesn't sound correct, it's not the end of the world to say that what Rabsheshes taught is not precise. The great Rabsheshes, you know why? Because he was blind. Because the Hu Gabra was Maftecha. Maftecha is Veloshan Saginar. And therefore, since at a certain time of his life when he learned he couldn't see his teacher, so therefore he didn't get it exact. Wow. So therefore, when he repeated it, it doesn't have to be precise. There are other ways of learning it, but that's a very strong statement. But in the positive, the Gewaldigkeit of learning, seeing the Pnei Harav, and then when you quote this Torah to envision Pnei Harav, Amal Abza'iri, L'Ravasi, that Chakim Revi Lebar Pasio. I don't understand. You Ravasi, you quote Bar Pasio. And we're just said right now that to quote a person precise, you have to envision his face. Did you ever learn by him? You never learn. You don't even know what he looks like. But how can you quote him if you don't even know what he looks like? So to which Rav Asi responded, I'm a Talmud of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a Talmud of Bar Pasya. I know the face of my teacher. When Rabbi Yochanan quoted Bar Pasya, Rabbi Yochanan saw the face of Bar Pasya. So that also works. That means that when we teach a Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, we got it right. Because we heard it from a living Rebbe. And we saw his face. And this goes up and up and up and up. Amalei, Amalei. So Rabbi Asi responded to Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Mishmei. How great is this? And Rabbi Yochanan, I saw Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan saw Bar Pasya is good. Another thing. Amalei Rabbi Asi, Hakim, Rebbe, Rav. Did you ever see Rav? Are you so wise? The Atam Shmaitz and Mishmei, you never saw that. So Amalei, he tells him, you're right. But Rabbi Ada bar Ahava, I learned Rabbi Ada bar Ahava. Rabbi Ada bar Ahava was a Talmud of Rav. So I saw him and he saw him. Amra Mishmei. Okay, now the Gemara continues. Now that we mentioned David HaMelech, now let's learn the title of David HaMelech. That Ein Darsha Ein Bari L'Tzanim. In every generation, there's a certain ruach of a certain type of cynicism. And that's the way it is until Mashiach is coming. But there was no generation that had such cynics, Kedoyrei Shel David. And what was their unique chutzpah cynicism? They mocked. It's very much connected to mocking tzaddikim. That's the first step down. That they would go to the windows of David HaMelech. I just remembered something. I want to go back for a second. When the Gemara asks that over here, did David HaMelech want to live forever? That's in the Yerushalmi. Just to know the Babli, remember Masech Shabbos, like Daf Lamed, that sugya of David HaMelech, that David HaMelech asked God, when is he going to pass away? Remember that whole sugya? And God told him, I can't tell you the date, but I'll tell you the day of the week. And it was on Shabbos Kodesh. And every Shabbos Kodesh, David HaMelech learned, like Pasuk from Megillah, said that the Malach HaMavos couldn't get him. Why? No, because David HaMelech Taka wanted, according to the Babli, David HaMelech wanted to live forever, just to make that clear. In Yerushalmi, the pshat is that he wanted people to chazal Torah in his name. As a proud Chabad chassid, we have to waste happiness. Let's go back by it. So Eitzel, so here the Lotzanim that they went to the window of David HaMelech, and Omrim Loin, they told David, you know what they meant? It's a conversation that David HaMelech told God that he wants to build a Beis HaMikdash, and Hashem tells David HaMelech that your hands are filled with blood, even though it was Melchamto Shel Mitzvah. But since he killed others, God says that the Beis HaMikdash will be built by Shlomo HaMelech. The people found out about that conversation. So here, that's called the cynic. They told David HaMelech, knew when will the Beis HaMikdash be built. David HaMelech wanted to live forever. Let's go back to the Talmud Babli. But they told David HaMelech, if you are alive, the Beis HaMikdash won't be built. You should want to pass away. Why do you want to live? Ke'ilu, you should live on the cheshbon that God should not have his house over here. That was their cynicism. When will God's house finally come? And David HaMelech knew that the people that were criticizing him are coming from a dark place. They were making chayzik. They're trying to get me angry. Yovay Eli is a lashon shvua. You know what? I agree with them. I would rather, I want to live forever, but I would rather give up my life for the Beis HaMikdash to be built. That's the answer. That's why it's not a stira with the Babli. David HaMelech wanted to live Chaim Nitzchiyim Neshama Beguf. But then when he found out that the Beis HaMikdash cannot be built during his physical lifetime, that's over here. David HaMelech didn't want to live forever Beguf. He still wanted to live on forever by people quoting Torah in his name. And Samachti, I rejoiced when the cynics told me, Beis Hashem Melech, when is God's house going to be built? Even though they really meant to tell him that you have to pass away. The truth is that Hashem rather David HaMelech being alive than God having the Beis HaMikdash. However, says God to David HaMelech, only then you are destined to live a certain amount of time. You will not pass away one moment earlier. Only then, then you will lay with your forefathers. In other words, that no, you will have full days. Not only full years, full days. Because what will come with Shlomo HaMelech? He's going to build the Beis HaMikdash. And what's the kavanah of the Beis HaMikdash? We know from the Torah of the Rebbe, Ramban. Here this Gemara goes Keshitas Rambam, or the Rambam follows the Shita that the Iker of the Beis HaMikdash was us going up through the Karbonis. El-Akriv Karbonis, Sibur. So if the kavanah is Karbonis, Chaviv Olai Tzedakah Mishpat. It's better for me that David HaMelech's tzedakah and mishpat sha'ata oisem yoiser min hakarben, greater than a carbon. Shneimar, as it says, oiser tzedakah mishpat nifchar lashem mizevach. And the way the Alter Rebbe explains the whole avodah of a carbon, that you have the avodah with the godly soul is getting close to God, and then you have to have the gevura, the slaughtering of the animal soul. By the way, that's the tzedakah and that's the mishpat. The mishpat is gevura, the judgment, And then the tzedakah is we allow the godly soul to come closer to God. Be that as it may, bottom line is that even when a person is physically no longer here, when we repeat their Torah, they continue to be over here. Elama, that when a person is such a chassid, when a person is such a Talmud, that everyone knows that Yeshua is a Talmud of Moshe, then it's self-understood that the Torah of the Talmud is in the name of that. And then everything, imagine our zechus, if we would talk be better mikusharim, then everything that we would do would give more covet, would give it's not only about more covet, even though the lashon of Chazal is, let me get the lashon over here, but when it comes to tzaddikim, that their divrei Torah is, let me get the right words, that their divrei Torah is mechabedem, but it's also that sefsois of roichashois bakever, which means that the tzaddik himself is still involved in this world, in the creating of a dira b'tachtonim. We'll stop over here. Hadar Allah, we'll start from Shekalim, and God willing, in the next class we will start the third chapter.
Question. Quick question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Danny.
Oh, I was going to ask. It seems Rabbi Zajac was upset. If the whole idea was the lips moving, but he was upset when he was alive. Now, he wasn't. You're saying he was upset that his student was not saying things in his name, because when he would pass away, then people would learn, and they would learn it in his name.
That means he saw in his Talmud. His Talmud is not quoting him B'chayev. He's not going to quote him La'achar Meisai. Yeah.
Are you saying that after he passes away, he's afraid that his Talmud wouldn't quote him in his name?
He was upset now for the future misbehavior. Yep. Yes, let's go.
If there are extra funds for burial and they're used to build a mausoleum, will it not cause others not to donate next time, thinking it's a waste of funds?
No, I don't think so. I think they'll trust more the tzedakah collectors. It means if someone makes a fund for Reuven and all the money was used for Reuven, that's more honesty.
All right, thank you.
I see it that way. It's only that the Rashbag already said that people understand, people give lachatchila more leeway to Gaboy Tzedakah. But they should at least communicate. They should let people know what they're doing.
Got it. Thank you.
Wow, these dafim are pashut. They're huge, but they're amazing. All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shekalim Daf Ches. We are going to be starting the third Perek on Daf Zayin on the base. We're going to be speaking about the thrice yearly withdrawal of the Shekalim from the chamber of the Shekalim. That withdrawal is called the Trumas Halishka. And we're going to connect that to the thrice yearly rabbinic Granois Shel Meiser Behema. I know we spoke it out in the intro to the last daf, quickly repeating it, that you have to separate Meiser of your own animals that are born into your flock. And there are details that animals that were born into 1 year cannot be gathered with animals that were born in another year. We have in the beginning of Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, as we have in Masechtas Bechayros, when is the Rosh Hashanah for Behema? Be that as it may, even though according to most Rishonim, that you need not, you don't say that until you made the Meiser Behema, it's Tevel. We don't say that biblically, but rabbinically they gave 3 times during the year. This date came, then you have to separate the Meiser. And if you didn't, from then on, it's considered Tevel, and people waited for those 3 dates in order to make the separation, and those 3 dates are somehow connected to the dates of Trumas Halishka, but actually, as we will see, by Trumas Meiser, we'll have a Machloikes Tanoim, so we're going to be learning details about the din of Meiser Behema, explaining why we have the different opinions. We're going to be learning also more details in the Mishnah about this thrice yearly withdrawal of the Shekalim from the shekel funds, that they had 3 boxes, the size of the boxes, how they would write on each box, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, or whether they use the Greek language, Alpha, Beta, Gamma. And we're going to have the opportunity to both review some of Hilchas Shabbos and the Hashgacha Pratis. We're learning this in Chodesh Nisan Tavshan Pei Aleph, the week before Pesach, right? And the Olam is going to be learning it during Pesach. We're going to be reviewing amazing laws of Dalit Koisoi. And even though we learned some of it in Arei Psachim, we'll have an opportunity to see that in some areas there's a machlokes between the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, the Din Dalit Koises. We're going to speak about how Torah brings forth a radiance on one's face. And if we'll have time, we will also review a detail that we had at the end of Arei Psachim about how exactly do we figure out what the shiur of a revi'is is. And you need to have a shiur revi'is when it comes to the din dalut koises, as we will further elaborate when we learn this daf. Without any further ado, Freilach Chevra Daf Zayin Amid Beis, starting the third chapter, Halacha Aleph, the first Mishnah, says the Mishnah, B'shloisha Parakim B'shana Toidamin Es Halishka. There are 3 times a year. So there is the input of the money, and then there's the output of the money. We're speaking about the output, that money was withdrawn from the lishka, and then that money was used to buy the korbanos tzibur. Time number 1 is b'thrice ha-Pesach, halfway to Pesach. As we will clarify, halfway means 30 days before Pesach. That's what we have in the beginning of Pesachim. That's the time when we have to be darshan b'hilchas ha-Pesach. Halfway, right? Price, halfway is 15 days. Who knows when 15 days before Pesach is? Chevre. So when we learned this a few days ago, I made a misquote. I said Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's not correct. Rosh Chodesh Nisan is 14 days before Pesach. Half of 30, which is 15, it's the last day of Adar. Now there's another nuance. How many days does Adar have? So nowadays, it's going to have a Rosh Chodesh Nisan until Mashiach is only one day Rosh Chodesh, which means the last day of Adar is always Chavtes. But when they were Mekadosh al Pi Aliyah, Lavdafka, it could have been Yom Lamed. So it's the last day of Adar. That's the first time. The next time is the Thrice Watzeres. Again, based on the premise that 30 days before Yom Tov, Yadarshan, not like the Beis Yosef that says it's only before Pesach because there are many halachas, but before every Yom Tov, 30 days is when you have to start learning the hilchas of that Yom Tov. So 30 days before Shavuos, half to that is 15 days before Shavuos. It only comes out that the difference of time between the Thrice Pesach and the Thrice Hatzeres is relatively little. But they would remove more Shekalim, and the third and final time was the Thrice HaChag. 30 days before Chag. When is that again, my friends? That's going to be the last day of Elul. Today also it's going to be Chavtes Elul. And says now the Mishnah, just like we have these dates that were the dates of the Trumas Halishka, similarly, the Hein Duranois, they are the rabbinic designated times of doing Meiser Behemah. As we spoke out, biblically, there aren't any specific times to do Meiser Behemah. Not only that, Midoy Rice, according to most of the Shoinen, if I have animals and I decided I'm hungry for Shabbos, I'm taking one of my animals prior to Meiser Behemah. I didn't do a sin. I just didn't fulfill the mitzvah. It's not tevel. The Chachamim said, no, there are 3 times a year that you have to gather the animals that were born into your flock on this year and separate the Trumas, the Meiser Behemah. And from that date onwards, if you didn't, rabbinically, it's tevel. And people would actually wait for those 3 dates. What are the 3 dates? The same 3 dates, says Rabbi Akiva. Now, here we're going to learn other opinions of Tanoim. They are not arguing with the Trumas Halishka. They are only arguing when it comes to the dates of Meiser Behemah, says the Mishnah. Ben Azai Omer. Ben Azai says, no, that Be'esrem Tisha B'Adar, right? See, he doesn't say B'Thrice Pesach. And he says the 29th of Adar. So that's the whole deal. What about what happens if there's a 30th day? But he held that even when they were Mekadosh the Chodesh al Pi Aliyah, you would not make a 30th day. And that's a topic we'll speak more about in Rosh Hashanah and other areas. The next day is Ve'echad Sivan, not 15 days before. Here it's already much closer to Shavuos. And why would he hold that? A lot of it we can push. There's not enough time, and that's because after the Goyden, there was a lot of animals. After you made the separation, now it's no longer tevel. Now everyone can buy animals. We wanted to make sure that there are animals available for Yom Tov, both for the mitzvahs of bringing karbanos and also to have meat for Yom Tov. And he felt that if you'll do it too much prior to Shavuos, then by the time Shavuos comes, there won't be enough animals. What about Pesach? Very simple. From the beginning of the year until Pesach, many animals accumulated. So after you did the Trumas Meiser, the 29th of Adar, there'll be a lot of animals left over. But how many animals are born in between the Thrice Pesach and Shavuos? That's a very small amount of time. So to begin with, there won't be that many animals. So if you're going to do it a full 15 days prior, then there might be a shortage. And now another detail. When did you do the third one? Not the 29th day of Elul, but the 29th day of Av. Why is that? Because as we learned in the beginning of Masechus Rosh Hashanah, Arba'am Rosh Hashanah, we only separate Meiser Behemoth from the animals that were born in the same year. Now, if I didn't separate the animals this year, I have to do it next year. But I don't gather the animals of this year and next year together. Each year stands separately. When is the Rosh Hashanah for Meiser Behemoth? So that's really a machloikas tanoim. He held, right, Rabbi Zajac holds that the Rosh Hashanah is, as we'll see, or perhaps is, Rosh Chodesh Elul. So the last time to do it for the prior year is the last day of the year. And that is the 29th of Av. However, Rabbi Elazar, now this Rabbi Elazar or Rabbi Lezer, in Yerushalmi, we take out the olives. This is not the Rabbi Elazar ben Pidas by Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan. This is the Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. This is the Tanach. That we call him Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Shimon Oimrim, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. Thank you, I'll take that back. Rabbi Eliezer Hagadol, very good. So Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon hold that the first time, again, this is not concerning the Trumas Halishka, but this is concerning the Meiser Behema be'Echad Nisan. Echad Nisan is 14 days. What did we learn, Chevra, in the beginning of Pesachim? There was a machloikas tanoim, how many days prior to Pesach Hayodoirish? One opinion said 30 days, the other opinion said 2 weeks. That's 2 weeks, 14 days. And likewise, he holds like Ben Azai, that when it comes to Shavuos, 2 weeks prior, even 2 weeks is too much time. There won't be enough animals. And then he does hold B'negei at the end of the year, not like the Shita that holds that it's Ve'echad, Ve'elul, but he holds that the Rosh Hashanah from Meiser Behemoth Ve'echad, the Tishrei, and therefore the last day of the year is B'chavtes Ve'elul. B'chavtes Ve'elul. Now, V'lama Amr B'chavtes Ve'elul, V'lo Yamru Be'echad B'tishrei, Bishloim in the Tanakama, he holds 15 days. 15 days is Chavtes. But since they hold, when it comes to Pesach, it's Be'echad B'Nisan. Why Be'echad B'Nisan? Because it's 14 days. It's the full 14 days, the 2 weeks that you're Doirish B'Hilchas HaChag. So 2 weeks before Sukkot is Rosh Hashanah. The answer is the Kneshu Yomtev, the Efshel La'ased the Yomtev, and there's reasons for that. Not because you can't be toidim with the Rabbanan. You can't say that because the kedusha happens automatically. One of the main issues that we speak about here, and that's because they would dye, they would paint the back of the animal with red paint, and that's tzviyah. That is what you can do on Yom Tov. And Lefika Chigdimu, you don't push it forward, you move it back to Chavtas Be'elul. Says the Gemara Amar Ababo that kol hein detaninam pras in any context, right? Achilas pras means half. The word pras means palga. Now, half of what? If they're speaking about 15 days, it means half of 30 days. Palga de lamed yoim. Why are we using 30 days as a reference for anything? Because koydem lamoyed. That is the time. And now we say that these, according to the Rabbi Akiva the Tanakh, that the same 3 junctures of the year are the same 3 times. That Rabbanon made a God in a designated time to separate Meiser Behema. Why is it dafka during those 3 times? Practical reason, because animals don't give birth all at the same time. And generally, they give birth a little bit prior to these 3 times. Rabbi Zajac says in the name of Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and many understand that not only are they not arguing, but they are furthering, they are expanding the explanation of Rabbi Yechanan. Since animals give birth during that time, and even though again, you can even chef without taking off Meiser Behema, but once Chazal gave a Gorain, people dafka waited until that Gorain. And we want to have that Gorain as close as possible, close enough before the Yom Tov, because then a lot of animals accumulated, and therefore there was a lot of surplus of animals which brought the prices down, even though there was a big demand for Yom Tov. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yudan, 2 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Another reason, when you separate Meiser Behema like any other carbon, we will learn a Masechtas Rosh Hashanah. The law of don't delay bringing a carbon. There's a three-way machlokas tanoim when you're over. But the goal is bring it as soon as possible. If they would separate the Meiser Behema during the year, not near the time that we would go to the Beis HaMikdash, so we would get into the habit, we separated Meiser Behema, but we put it aside. Once it's done dafka, shortly before Yom Tov, then when we go that Yom Tov to the next Yom Tov, we'll take it with us. And it's going to, so to say, it's going to help us not violate the not delaying of bringing karbanos, which also include not delaying bringing the Meiser Behema. Amar Rabbi Yosef, another neat nuance. Aside of not bringing the carbon, now that the Chachamim said that there are 3 times when you should be separating the Meiser Behema, then rabbinically, don't delay doing it. Even though we'll learn soon on Daf Ches that if you delayed the Garoin, you will do it in the next Garoin. You don't say that this year's and next year's cannot be done together. This is part of this year. It will be done with the animals of this year, but still we don't want to delay it. Says the Gemara on Daf Ches, Tamon Tanin, and we learned over there, this is a Mishnah in the Rosh Hashanah. This is a Mishnah in Mechairos. Rabbi Meir Oimer, the Echad, the Elul, the first day of Elul is called Rosh Hashanah L'Meiser Behema. As we just mentioned, you don't take off meisters from animals that were born from one year together with animals that were born on another year. What is the cutoff time? Says Rabbi Meir be'echad be'elul, not be'echad be'tisha be'echad be'elul. However, Rabbi Elazar, that's Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua and Rabbi Shimon Oimrim, no be'echad be'tisha. And what about the Nazai? The Nazai says that I have a doubt. I don't know whom to follow. And therefore, ha'eluliyim, the animals that are born on Chodesh Elul, do they belong to the prior year? Do they belong to the next year? I don't know. And what's the solution? Mis'asrin b'fnei atzman, tie them on their own. Gewaldig. Because we don't know which year they belong to. You know, what happens if you don't have 10 or more? We'll leave the details for later, but that's the concept. Amar Rab Chuna, Pastor and Amoya. Says Rab Chuna, Talmud Rab Meir. Why does Rab Meir say be'echad be'elul? He has a gewaldige chiddush. Rab Chuna is saying that really, what establishes animal of a year? Not when the animal is born, but it's when the animal was conceived. And as we learn in Mechairos Daf Ches, that's the whole intro to the Saved Atuna Sugya regarding how long the animals, that's about the snake. But the Gemara begins, how long do certain animals carry their young, the gestation period. And we learned over there that by the Hemadakis, it's 5 months. So animals that were born already in Elul were conceived after the Chodesh Nisan. So it really says Rab Chuna, the time which we count is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But we're only looking for the time of conception. Animals that are born in Av were conceived before Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 5 months just. Animals that were born after Av in Elul, they were conceived after Nisan. Really, it's Nisan. That if they are born before Elul, that means that they were conceived prior to Nisan. And the chiddush of Rab Chuna is that really the Rosh Hashanah, L'Rav Meir, of Meiser Behema is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But he speaks about Echad Be'elul because he's looking at the birth. But we have to therefore go backwards to the conception, and everyone challenges Rab Chuna that the 5-month gestation period, as we have in B'chayres Daf Ches, is only for Behema Dakas. For Behema Gasas, it's a longer time, and that has to be resolved. Weiter. Rabbi Yosef bar Rebbe Bun, in the name of Rab Chuna, says that Kama de Rabbi Elazar de Rab Shimon is because it says in Tehillim Lokshu Charam Hatzoim that the sheep of the flock became clad, which means they became pregnant. And this part of the pasuk is referring to animals that become pregnant earlier, because it's not exact the same. There are different times. There are animals that get pregnant earlier, they give birth earlier, animals give birth later. When the pasuk continues, and the valleys cloak themselves, that also is a reference to animals that are born later, right? And when the pasuk says Yisroi A'u Af Yoshiru, literally means they would shout joyfully and they will sing. But he's making a drasha that Yisroi A'u means reim. You put them together. And Yoshiru means yash, to be ma'aser them. It's all a drush. That elu ve'elu nechnasim ladir lis aser. Fakert, the pasuk is being menamis that we don't care whether the animal was conceived before Nisan or after Nisan, whether the animal was born before Elul or in Elul, they are all part of the same year. Says the Gemara Ben Azai, further explaining that Ben Azai's doubt. Hoyel ve'elu oimim kach, ve'elu oimim kach. So I don't know which one to follow. So therefore, to be machmer, you ha'elulia misasrim b'fnei atzman. Okay, so noilid loy, very importantly, take out the letter base. If 5 animals were born in the month of Av, you see, you need to have a minimum of 10 animals to put them into the deer to then take off the ma'aser. And another 5 animals were born in Elul. And according to Rabbi Zajac and according to Rabbi Shimon, Avada, they're put together. According to Rav Meir, Avada, they're not put together. Likewise, 5 of Elul and 5 of Tishrei, according to Ben Azai, based on his doubt, you can't combine any of them together. However, even according to Ben Azai, 5 animals were born in the beginning of Tishrei, and 5 animals were born later in Av later, then for sure, then you have 10 born in the same year. Says the Gemara, Ben Azai machriya al divrei talmid dov. That doesn't make sense. In other words, all of these Tanoim, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua, Rabbi Shimon, were all students of Ben Azai. How strange is it that there is a machlokes amongst his Talmidim, and he says, I don't know whom to follow. He is their teacher. He should know how to resolve it. Says the Gemara, answers the Gemara, Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Mesha. Here, Mekan, the Russian pronunciation. That Moshe becomes a Mesha, or people pronounce it. Rabbi Yosha says in the name of Shmuel, Rabbi Tzadai, Rabbi Yitzchak. Nah, the machlokes didn't begin with Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Elazar, and Rabbi Shimon. If that would be the case, Rabbi Ben Azai would know what to do. Already, the prior great Tanoim argued. Tanoim prior to Ben Azai, that this refers to Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva. Oh, now Thrice meres that Oy Bazoi Ben Azai was a chaver vit Talmud Hoy Rabbi Akiva. Even though we know Ben Azai began as a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, but if he never would have, so to say, if he wouldn't have gotten upgraded to be considered not only a Talmud but already a colleague, then the words that he used would be disrespectful. Because in Peiman, if you will say that Ben Azai always considered himself only as a Talmud of his teacher, is Barnash Amar Larabai Hoyel ve'elu Amru Kach. How could we are Talmidim if the Rebbe said something and other great ones said otherwise? We would never say, some say like this, some say like that. We are a Talmidim of the Rebbe, and what the Rebbe said is what counts. So the fact that he expressed himself Elu Eilam is because later in his life, Ben Azai went up from being only a Talmud to being what we call a Talmud Chaver. Says the Gemara Baitir, Rabbi Abun, B'Shem Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yitzchak, Shamalam min Hadah. He deduced that which we said, that later Ben Azai was considered not only a Talmud, but also a Chaver from what we said above, or min Hadah, from the following Mishnah. He argues with above. The Mishnah there is referring to a series of Mishnayos that we have, Baba Basrem, Daf Kuflun Ches, where Beishamai and Beisilon argue. Now, there, the way we have it recorded, there are 3 dinim, there's no time to speak them out. In the first 2 dinim, they argue, and then in the third halacha, they both agree. And on that, Amrulay, Ben Azai tells his teacher, Rabbi Akiva, came along, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, no, Beishamai and Beisilon even argue in the third Mishnah. He made another machlokes, to which Ben Azai tells Rabbi Akiva, Al-Hachalukim Onamitstadim. We are already in pain that there are so many dinim in which there's an argument. At least until you, Rabbi Akiva, on the third din over there in the series in Baba Basra, the version was they both agreed to the same halacha. Even that which was until now known as a unanimous ruling, you're adding a new machlokes. So now on that says Rabbi Abun, another source that Ben Azai became upgraded to be a Talmud Chaver. That Zoisoi Meres Ben Azai must have been a Chaver v'Talmud Rabbi Akiva. Because in Pema Rabbi, if he was only considered a Talmud, is Banash Amalei Rabbi El Shabasa, you came to add a machlokes on that which was previously known as unanimous, and it's not what he's saying, it's from the way he said it, is Araya, parenthetically, that Ben Azai started out as a Talmud, and then he was considered a Talmud and a chaver. Says the Gemara Baita, 2 dots, tamon, tanina. We learned over there, not in bubble. There we learned in the Mishnah. There means in Masechet B'chayres. Kol hanilod and me'echad b'tishrei ad chavtes be'elul. This is the Tanach that holds that Rosh Hashanah l'maisa behem is be'echad b'tishrei. So any animal that's born from echad b'tishrei until chavtes be'elul, harei elu mitztarfin. Both chamisha lifnei Rosh Hashanah and the other 5 animals were born after Rosh Hashanah. Then you don't combine them together. There's actually no obligation to take off maisa. Even mitztarfin. However, even though, yes, the rabbis imposed in a year itself to have the 3 goranos, but that's a din of lechatchila. But it doesn't separate the periods of each goyim as a separate period. That if Hay were born before one of the 3 goranos and another 5 was born after another goyim, then yes, hadayelo mitztarfen. You should have done it before. But if you didn't, it's still of the same year. It says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosef, that's the Gemara speaking. Hada oimeres. That based on what we learned in the Mishnah, that it has to do when the animals are born, and another very important nuance, let's go with Echad B'Tishrei being Rosh Hashanah L'Maaseh Behema, so you can gather the animals that were born on Chavtes Elul to the animals that are being tithed of that year. So you say Meres, Maaser Behema, Lo Yasu, I say not like Chenet and not like a Shlish. Chevre Ganeden Halachas. Big Kitzur. We have halachas of tithing fruits. Now, same concept. We don't tithe peiros that came into the world on one year with peiros that came into the world on another year. Now, guys, when is Rosh Hashanah Lilanis? People are familiar with it. It's a machlekes tanoim. We paskin by the first Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah, that the Tu B'Shvat. Now, exactly what needs to happen on Tu B'Shvat for the animal to be for the fruit to be considered? It came into the world. Chanata means when it emerges. Chanata is technically when the flowers fall up, when it begins to bud. But that's a point in the development of the fruit that it's not yet edible. If tantamount to chanata by an animal would be the conception. Very important. So by the fact that we emphasize that it has to do with when the animal is born, not like we had on top of the Amid, that really it's connected to the moment of conception. No, here it's when it's born. It means that the halachis, the rules of how you determine the year of Maaser Behema does not follow, it's not similar to the rules of Peiros, nor like the law of a Shlish. What's the law of a Shlish? Chai Zerayim. And this was Mamish in Yerushalmi, you have a mountain on Zerayim. When it comes to grains and to one fruit, the olives, the halacha is that you determine its year not by the olive, not by the chanata, but from when it's already a third developed. What's the soid of a third? From that point, it's edible. It would be better if it grows more from when it's edible. Now, birth of an animal, when it comes to a meiser korban, when is an animal edible? By a korban, only by the 8th day. If we would have followed the rules, at least of grains, but it's not chanata. So we're following it like the other rule, that how you determine the year by grains and by the olives from when it's edible. Well, it doesn't follow the same, because if that would be the case, since you can only bring a korban from the 8th day and on, then he should have said that you gather in the pen, you know when? From Echad B'Tishrei until Chav Beis Elul. Because animals that are born after from Chav Gimel Elul on, you can't eat them yet. But still he counted them in. Because in Tamar Kechenet, if we would have correlated the system of how you determine the year, as we do by almost all of the fruits, Chenet, then we would have only looked at from when it got pregnant. That's clear. And in Tamar, and if you're going to say that Kishlish, which is from when it's edible, then but that's not what he says. He says from Chavtas Elul. So it's interesting that it's like a third system. And, not everything has to go on the same track, but he's making that observation. However, Rav Shammai disagrees with it. Rav Shammai says in the name of Rabbi Bibi, or in the name of Rabbi Bun, in the name of Rabbi Chia, that what? No, really it follows the same system of grains and olives. It has to do with when it's edible, which is the din of a shlish, kishlish oisu oisa. However, there's another nuance, that this must follow the Taninon, the Mishnah Mechaydis follows Rav Shemin, What does Rab Shimon say? That mechuser zman nichnas l'dir leisasir. Even though if Punk, the one that was born Chav Gimel Elul, Chav Daled Elul, would be the one coming out from Meiser Behema, you cannot yet bring it. So what? Put it into the pen. Let this one come out. When will you bring it as a korban? Wait the minimum. Allow 7 days to pass. Wait the minimum of 8 days. However, Koren Mana Imir Rabbi Shammai, and he challenged him. And he says, he told Shammai, At Amrat Hadam Milsa, did you really say what you just said? That a whole Mishnah over there is going to follow Rab Shimon? It doesn't work out. Because then everyone in the Mishnah is going to have to follow Adas Yachid. Look in that Mishnah. Tamon Taninam, Ben Azai Oimer, Ho'elulim is Asrim La'atzman. Right? And what does he mean by that? He also means Elulim, if an animal that was born from Rosh Chodesh Elul until Chavtes Elul, they all go together. Lo yafilu noilad ad esrim v'tisha be'elul. That's what he means. Now, Oy bazoi islach l'meimar. Are you telling me that Ben Azai holds like Rab Shimon and not like the Rabbanon? You can't make a whole Mishnah follow Adas Yachid. And therefore, Kama da'at Omar al the Rabbanon. No, I'll explain differently. Still, it follows the rule of Shlish. You can't eat it. So long, hold on. Don't agree with Rab Shimon. Don't put it in the pen. But wait until all of the animals in the pen are allowed to be brought as a korban, because maybe that one will come out. And then it has to be roy lachila right away. He says, Gabaldik, the animal was born on the 23rd of Elul. Don't put it in the pen. Wait until it's 8th day. But when you put it in the pen on the 8th day, you put it with animals of the prior year. So it doesn't contradict. The animals that are born in a year, the Tanach holds that we just quoted these shitos from Echad B'Tishrin until Chavtes Be'elul. When will you put it in the din? Kishitas Rabbanon. Let's read it inside. Manichin L'Shana Haba. And by the way, if you don't have 10 of these that were born in the last week of Elul, then you can also set aside others that were born prior, just to make sure you have the minimum of 10. The same thing. That the same thing. He command the whole Chodesh Adar Chavtas Elul. But if you have animals that are born from Chav Gimel Elul until the end, you wait until all of them went through their minimum of 7 days. And if you have to add others that were born prior in the month of Elul, but they belong to the same group. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Chia or Amar Rabbi Chuna, Zoy Meres, that Yomim Shabachayr Mechuser Zman Bohen Oilon. Now that we are saying the Neged the din of Meiser Behema, even though we're not going to follow it up Shimon, nevertheless. So you have to wait the 8 days, but we count it from when it was born, which is why we only care when it was born. And if it was born b'chavtes be'elul, it belongs to the prior year. If it gavaldik, so now let's extend the same logic to the din of a b'char. Now, what's the din of a b'char? The animals, also the first animals, right? The first b'char has to be offered as a korban. Now, there's a nuance. When do you have to bring it? So the Torah says you have to bring it within its first year. Now let me ask you a question. Same concept, right? We have in Vayikra, Parshas Emor, that only Meyem Hashmini V'Hala Yirot L'Karban Hashem. You have to wait 8 days. So someone erroneously can think that from when do you count the year of a Bechar? After which it's already beyond the first year. You lost. Don't count it from the 8th day. Count it from when it was born. The fact that you cannot bring it the first 7 days doesn't change the cheshbonim from the date of its birth. Amar Rav Mana, Amar Rav Yoina. Abba, so Rav Yoina, Rav Mana said it in the name of his father, Rav Yoina L'chayra. That I agree with you. Good gizah. And I'll back you up. That Shamalah, I'll prove it to you from the following pasuk. And now we're going to Parshas Re'eh. That's the beginning of the Kol HaBechar that we read on Yom Tov. Kol HaBechar Asher Yiboled. If it's a male one, Tagdish, now the type of Tagdish is you shall sanctify. Now this is a problem. Problem is, by Bechar, we don't sanctify the Bechar. The Bechar is born with Kedusha. So what is it meaning you shall sanctify? So it means like this: you shall sanctify doesn't mean that you shall sanctify. It means you shall calculate the year from when it was born. That's the pshat of Tagdish. Tagdish doesn't mean to sanctify; it means to calculate. Moving on to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, more details going back not to the Ma'aser Behema, but we're coming back to Shekalim. That Trumas Alishka happened 3 times a year. Now, when the date came to enter that chamber and to remove Shekalim, how did they do that? According to many opinions, the half a shekels that we sent to the Holy Temple was piled on the ground. One big pile. However, when we removed it, we did not remove it in one box, but we had 3 boxes. Shalosh kupais in 3 boxes. Shalosh, so in every box had the amount of 3 saw. Just to know that 1 saw is approximately 4.5 gallons. Parmenas alishka, would we separate the lishka, and on each box they would write on one aleph, on the other base, on the other gimel. Rabbi Yishmael says that they wrote actually letters in Greek, Yevadlis Kasav Aleim, which is Alpha, Besa, Gamma. Now, Ein Hatoidim, Nichnas, the one who was designated to remove the Shekalim, would not enter, not with a hemmed pair of pants or a hemmed jalaba that was folded up. There was no upfolds, because if you have a little hem, then it's possible for you to stick a coin in there, to ganvit. Below sandal, nor not with sandals. Below the tefillin, not with ring tefillin. You can stick it under your tefillin, and not even with the amulet. Why? Because if this person later would become poor, they would say, you know why he became poor? Because when he entered the lishka, he stole, and that was his punishment. The yominu may oven al lishka he'ani. Or if he'll become rich, they'll say, you know why he's rich? Because he stole. That the details that Rambam gives is that when he entered, they spoke to him, so they should not be choished that he put it in his mouth, because if you put a coin in your mouth, you don't speak clearly. Yes. A person has to behave in a way where they satisfy the scrutiny, not only of God, but even of people that sometimes can be choished you. And how do we know that? One pasuk is from the story of Bnei Gad and Reuven that Moshe Rabbeinu told them that then only if you're going to go chalutz lifneim v'hiyisem nikiyah ma'Hashem umi Yisrael. Don't. It's not only God knows the emes. Behave in a way that no one is going to be choished you. Now, by the way, in that story, them not going in battle already doesn't look good. But here we're saying that people are going to be choished that you stuck in a hem. So there's another pasuk. And that's something that we say in benching. That that's more than the first pasuk, because here, even if a person doesn't look us in a negative light, what we're doing looks like we're doing something okay. If someone is looking to find something negative, if we are able to, we should behave in a way that will pass that scrutiny as well. Says the Gemara, Tamon Tanini Masechta Shabbos. That what that Mefana Nafilu Dalad the Chamish Kupois Chaver Gavaldik. We're learning there the sugya and Shabbos of Tircha Yisrael, excessive exertion, that we may not schlep on Shabbos simply because Tircha Yisrael. But there's an exception. If you are inviting people to eat with you, that's a mitzvah. If you are learning Torah, gathering to davening Tzorich mitzvah, then you are allowed to schlep 4 or 5 boxes, and the Ayin Sham, make up your mind, 4 or 5, but the Mishnah there, Bechlal, does not clarify the size of a kupa. And Rav Zairi asked his teacher, Rabbi Yoshia, or we have on the side of Rabbi Shaya, Kamehi shiur and shal kupas, that up until Dalid or Chamesh is allowed to be schlepped, and it's not included in the Tircha Yisei, the rabbinic prohibition, Amalei, to which he responded, Daf Chesamet Beis, that even though in Masechta Shabbos we don't have clarity, but that's the klal in Mishnayos. Nilmaid Sasum min hamafurash. Here in Shekalim, the Mishnah did define each box had the amount of 3 saw. So in other areas of Mishnayos where we speak about a kupa, we know how big the kupa is. Now this is a brayso that even elaborates more details than we had in our Mishnah. That the shalosh kupa shall shalosh shoyson. The brayso noch makes a detail to make it clear that means that every time they separated from the lishka, the half a shekels, the sum total was 9 sa'im. And since it was done 3 times a year, the total amount that was separated in the year, she'ein esrim v'sheva, 9 times 3, soim tamer salishka. This is gavaldik in a braisa, because if not, people can misunderstand it. Maybe every box only had 1 sa'ah, right? So 3 times altogether 3. Maybe another time. This makes it clear. Every box had 3 sa'ah. Every time you did the Tumas Alishka, you took out 3 boxes. And another detail, as we had in the Mishnah, because of on each box, Aleph Beis Gimel. And why did they have to number or write letters on the boxes? Because of Aleph Beis Gimel, says the Beraisa Loimen Mistafik Min Arishayim Kadim Lishniyah, because the muzzle of the coins, when they removed the 3 boxes, and then they needed to start buying Korbanei Sibur, which box did they take it from? Not any one of the 3. First, they went to box number Aleph, Alpha. And only when the Alpha was done did they go into the Beta. Now, Umin Hashniya, and then when they finished Kedel, and then when they finished the base, no, the Gimel was dafka to be used last. Everything needs mazel. Afilu a sefer right from the Oren. Says the Gemara Vayter, something similar that we learned with Nilmoit Sasum and Amafurish. Tamon Tanim, we learned also Masech the Shabbos. Hamoitzi Yayin, when it comes to the Isur of Hoitza'ah. So even though, right, we apply Chatzi Shir, that's what we learned, Chitas Rashi, the Fine Gimel, and other places, even to non-edible items. And even though Chatzi Shir, we pass like Rabbi Yechanan, is also in a Torah. However, my friends, for you to be punished, an Oynish is only when you carry the minimum shir. What's the minimum shir of Hoitza'ah? So the Mishnah says, Hamoitzi Yayin, if the shir is Kedem and Zigas HaKois, the amount needed to dilute it in a cup. In the times of Chazal, the wine was chai, raw wine was concentrated. It was very concentrated. And normally to drink it, for it to be a geschmack, you would add different ratios. Where normally the ratio is 3 to 1, which means a quarter was yayin chai. And then when you added another 3 of that amount, then you would have a cup that is used for drinking. Now, it's not clear how much wine do you need in the cup for drinking? We know it's a revius. Where do we get that from? None of that is written there. So there it is, Sasum, and Rabbi Zaidi asked Rabbi Yoshia, according to the same version on the side of Yoshia, that Kama shiur and Shalkais. Well, how big is the cup? So Amalei, to which he responds, you're right, in Shabbos we don't have the share, but Nimot Sasam and Amafurish, the Tani Rabchia, Yidin, Pesach, Bindalot Kaisis, Arba Kaisis Amru. The 4 cups that we have to drink on Pesach, Yeshnom, they contain altogether a revius of Yayin Be'italki, good Italian wine, which means that each one has a 1/4 of a revius. And exactly, because a kois diluted is a revius, which means the concentrated wine is a 1/4 of it, because now we know the shit of a revius, and that is the amount that if you carried on Shabbos, you did Hoitza'ah. And by the way, the keli in itself doesn't count because the keli is subservient to the content in it. Remember those dinim in Ochel Shabbos? So even though the keli per se would be a violation of Hoitza'ah, but since it has content in it, the content needs to have the minimum shir. So the same will be by Chiyuv Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, in the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that you should know that this shir only follows the Tan of Rabbi Yehudi, because the Tani Mayim, what's the shir of Mayim? They give me the amount that you consume in one gulp. It's not clear now in halacha how much is the shir, but one thing is clear: Gemia is not a revis. And Rabbi Yehuda argues. Rabbi Yehuda says when it comes to mayim, they would have certain eye salve, and they would need to add water in it, and that's much less than Gemia. So by water, Rabbi Yehuda is the machmer. Then the Baraisa continues. Let's skip the parentheses. Yayin, what's the minimum amount of wine? Here again, the Tanakh says, Kedei Gemiyah. And on that says, Rabbi Yehuda, no, Kedei Mizigas HaKois. So again, we're just pointing out that Kedei Mizigas HaKois is not Das HaKoil, it's Das Rabbi Yehuda. Now, question is, Mazug Bekama. Mazug Bekama is, again, Hoitza'ah, how much of diluted wine must you carry to be liable? So here again, says the Gemara, Nashmeina Menado, will derive it from the following brayso. Mayim kedei gemia Rabbi Yehuda oime kedei lo shus hakilo, and yayin kedei gemia Rabbi Yehuda oime kedei mizigas hakois. So hada amora, that mazuk is also kedei mizigas hakois. In other words, that It's all the same. It's a quarter, or if you diluted it already, it's the total. And what is the total? Kama shiur and shel kois, right? How large is every cup of the dalit koisos? So we will answer at Avias. The challenge is that, even now, how much is a Avias? So the Amoraim are giving different then known measures to have a clarity in how much is a Avias. Rav Avin says it's te tarton urevia. Te tarton is the name of a measure that people were familiar with. A te tarton was less than a Avias, but if you take the te tarton and a quarter of a te tarton together, then you have what we would call a Avias. Okay. And now that we're speaking about the din dalet koisos, so now we're going to have a shtickle Yerushalmi that's similar to what we learned in Bavli. And what will be amazing is that this same question we actually had over there, and there's a machlokes Bavli Yerushalmi. So the first question is, what happens if you would drink the cups together, not in the same cup, but you would have 4 cups, one after the other, without pausing in between? What will be did you fulfill the din of drinking dalet koisos? So says the Gemara, Mida Amar Rav Mana in the name of Rabbi Yossi, that Halel im Shema Beis HaKnesses Yatsa. We don't pass on this way. But if a person heard the Halel in the Beis HaKnesses, they need not recite it during the end of the Seder. And therefore, what creates the hefsek, the intermission in between the third and the fourth cup? We know, we just finished Arei Psachim. It's not only the Halal, but the Ikir, it's Halal. Now that you are saying, we don't pass on this with what you are saying, that if you heard the Halal in the shul, you don't have to say it in the Seder. He understands that to mean you can drink the third cup, which is what we do for Birchas Hanosim. And if you don't have to say Halal, then you right away have the fourth cup, and you're going to be Yoitza. That's how we understood it. So therefore, Hada Amara, that's the Naya. Yes, you are Yoitza. Now in Talmud Bavli, right, we had that question. If you drink the 4 cups one after the other, and the words that the Gemara gave is Yedei Yayin Yatsa, Yedei Dalet Koisos Lo Yatsa. We learned there that Rashbam teaches Yedei Yayin means you were Yoitza Simchas Yantiv, but you were not Yoitza the din of Dalet Koisos. They have to be consumed separately. Now, being that we have a few minutes just to speak out something, another thing, going to get to Arei Psachim, which will also enlighten our sugi over here. Quoting Shem Oimrei, the Rabbi Zajac, he says like this: if you remember in the beginning of Arei Psachim, that Tzadik Tessamud days, when we learned about the Mishnah that Lo Yevchasu Lo Dalet Koisos, so we quoted the Thrice. When we learned it together, we only quoted the beginning of Thrice. What does every Yid have to drink Dalet Koisos, or is it only the one leading the Seder? Is it like Kiddush? And Thrice was really at the end, he quotes a suffix, but in the beginning he says, that just like Kiddush only has to be consumed by the one making Kiddush, even though it's min hamufchar for everyone to drink as well, but only the one making Kiddush drinks and everyone fulfills the mitzvah of Kiddush. So he says that Dalet Koisos need not be consumed by every person. What is that question? That question really is based, why is there a din of Dalet Koisos? Now we find throughout Chazal 2 concepts, and the question will be which one is the Ikar and which one is, so to say, the Tafel. One of it has to do with drinking that we have to drink Dalet Koisos, right? The beginning of our Arei Psachim. A remes to the Dalet L'Shayin Shel Geula. It's a remes of the Dalet Koisos of Parei, the Dalet Koisos Shel Purana Yois v'chulei. So it's a din of having 4. There's another way of understanding it, is that each cup is connected to another mitzvah. Each cup is connected to another mitzvah. So you have Kiddush as a mitzvah, Magid is another mitzvah. Then you have Birchas Hanosim, you always have a mitzvah. Then you have the connected to the mitzvahs that you're making. Now, is it to drink it? Now, if it's connected to a mitzvah, that's the nekudah. We drink Kiddush. We have to. When you are mekadesh al hakois, it's not that important for you to drink it. It's about doing the Kiddush al hakois. Yes, we drink it, but you know what? We don't have to drink. You have to drink a roiv revis. You don't have to drink a cup. By Seder, it's a few notches beyond the drinking of Kiddush. Kiddush, Malay Lugma is enough, which is Roiv Revius. Dalet Koisos is Lachatchila, drink the whole Kois. And even if you're not going to drink the whole Kois, you have to drink Roiv Kois. And if your cup is 4 or 5 Revius and you have a big cup, you don't get away with drinking Roiv Revius. Oh, so if it's Be'ikir connected to doing a mitzvah on the Kois, then why would it be different than Kiddush? If it's connected to the din of the Dalet L'Shayin Shel Geula, then you have to have 4 koises. And all of these doubts that we have over here, whether if you drink them all together, we're going to learn about shiurim, all of it comes from that two options of what's the ikar din and dalet koises. Is it a din of dalet koises, or is it a din of doing a mitzvah on a cup? Let's go back. What does it mean? The Piskon. So the Tikvan Chadatin explains that that what happens if a person sips the cups, they sip it. Who cares if you sip it? It says that the Tikvan Chadatin that the wine satiates you only when you drink a lot of it as a time, or it does what it does if you drink a lot of it if you drink it slowly, it doesn't have any effect on you. Unlike food, explains the Tikvan Chadatin, if you munch on food, but at the end you ate X amount of calories, I don't care if you ate it quickly, you ate it slowly, it's going to give you the same type of halachic severe. So what's the goal of wine? Is the goal of wine, it should have some sort of, it should be masbiayu, and then drinking it, sipping it won't be good? Or we don't care, it's about the sum total that you drank. Let's read it inside. So he answered that klum amru sheyishta loy kadesh yishta v'lo yishtak v'loy kadesh yishta v'yishtaker. The goal is it should not be said. It doesn't have to make you intoxicated. It doesn't have to have any effect on you. There's no din severe, and therefore in shasa the piskan afu einem ishtaker, even though it won't have any effect on you, nevertheless it's going to be good. This is also connected to what we mentioned. In other words, if it's a din of making kiddush Allah, you made it ala kois, you did the mitzvah ala kois. If it's a din of drinking yayin derechedus, no, drinking derechedus is you want to be affected by the wine. That was the havamin, and therefore maybe you would have to drink it in 1 gulp or in 2 gulps. Ma'ulotz is the yayin shel shavi is another question. All products that grow in the Holy Land on the 7th year, after the zman habir may not be consumed, may not even, you can't even have hana from it. So what happens if you have wine that was made on the Shemitah year after the Zman Habiyun? Can you be Yoitze Dalet Koises? Why yes? Why not? I'll tell you why yes. Because mitzvah is lav lehenos nitna. So here again, is it a mitzvah to do a bracha on a cup, or is it to drink derechedus? Drinking derechedus means that you want to have hana, you want to have the chedus experience. There is a hana aspect. So answers the Gemara, Rabbi Zajac, yes, you're yoitz in the yain shel shvis. We look at it as a mitzvah aspect, and since mitzvahs lavli hanis niknu, all of this will be consistent. Therefore, you can be yoitz. Next question: Ma'ulotz is big coin ditin. Can you fulfill the mitzvah dalet koises by having spiced wine, right? Not just plain wine. And we have this word coin ditin on the last daf exactly over here. So answers to Gemara the Tani bar kapara that coin ditin is like wine. It's like wine. What do we mean? Hadahamara that yoitz in the yain konditin. Next question. Ma'ulotz is the yain mezugin. If the wine was very diluted, are you yoitz? Answers the Gemara with the Tani Rabchia that arba koises sha'amru yoitz in behem ben chayim if they're very concentrated or if they're very diluted. But what's the upper and lower limit? Ubulbad sheyehei. On one hand, it should have the taste of wine. Now, what's amazing is that when the wine is very, very concentrated, then it doesn't even have the overwhelmingness of the concentration, takes away the tamiyan. So that has to taste like wine. And on the other hand, if you dilute the wine, it can still taste like wine. But if it's very diluted, it loses the appearance of wine. So the upper limit of how diluted or how concentrated is on both hands. It has to taste like wine and it has to have the appearance of wine. Mitzvah, let's say, Dalet Koises is the yayin and the dafka red wine. And we have this also with Babli. We have this on Abib Sachim. Shenemar, as it says, Al Teda Yain Ki Yis Adam. Don't set your eyes on red wine. Because red wine is the hush of a wine. Because Ki Yitain B'Kois In, if a person is going to fix his eyes on drinking wine a lot, then the person will lose his power to discern between good and evil. So you see from over there that the wine that's chashuv is red wine. Says the Gemara Tani, we learned in the Braisa. And we don't know what the Braisa is referring to, but the Braisa is that cooked wine is not grape juice. Cooked wine is what we call cooked wine. It diminishes the chashivus of the wine. Cooked wine is just like spiced wine. Now, what is that referring to? So there's many different opinions. Some people hold that this is actually a din in yayin nesach, and subsequently in yayin stam. That since lahavdil the goyim would never use spiced wine for their avodah zarah. So wine that's spiced was not included in the din of yain nesach nor in the din of yain stam. And the same is with yain mevushal, as we know that the moment wine is cooked, it no longer is included in the din of yain nesach. Other people understand that this is concerning the nesachim. Now, when it comes to the mitzvah of pouring nesachim, spiced wine is not good, nor is cooked wine good. And by the way, it's mitzvah min hamufchar to use for the dalat kaises wine that's not mevushal, but aber, as we'll see, it's min hamufchar. But you have to be practical, because if you have people that can take away the kashrus of the wine, then you better have yain mevushal. Now, ma'ulatz is yain mevushal. Can you be yoitze? Amar Rabbi yes, yoitze in the yain mevushal. It's not min hamufchar, but that's what you should use, and you'll be yoitze. Rabbi Yoina l'tamei. The Rabbi Yoina kad havi shasi arbe kosi the pischam. Rabbi Yoina would drink 4 cups of wine, have a chazi kresha. His head would hurt until Chag, until Shavuos. In other words, he suffered so much from drinking the dalat kaisos that it led him to say, cook it. Cooking it is not grape juice. Cooking it means it's not going to be as chashuv, but it's still considered yain. And when you cook the wine, it loses its potency, and his head did not hurt until that time. And B'chlal mekan to know that, again, there are poskim that say that you can have grape juice for the dalat kaisos. It's certainly not ideal. If anything, have cooked wine. Now, there's another version that we don't have in our Gemara printed, but there was a similar story with the Tanach Rabbi Yehuda ben Abeloi, that when he would drink the dalat kaisos, his head would hurt until Sukkot. Also, and therefore, to diminish the pain, he would cook the wine. It made it not as bad. Now that we mentioned Rabbi Yehuda ben Abeloi, now we'll understand the hemshach according to this version. Says the Gemara that Chamisei Choda Matronisa Apoi, that a certain matronisa, a certain noble woman, saw the face, saw the countenance of Rabbi Yehuda ben Abeloi. Now what? That Nehina was shining. He had a shining countenance. So she said, Sava, Sava, elder, elder. I know why your face is shining. It's Hadom Mahani Telas Milan Isbach. One of the following 3 things happened to you, which is why you have such a beautiful shining countenance. Either the Shasi Chamra'at, you drank wine, and that's the connection. That drinking wine, it can give you a headache, but it brings forth a certain shine. And certainly Beruchni is the Chamra that we learned in the last daf, the Chamra, the halach of the Torah, or the Yeno Shel Torah that ever considers the previous Torah brings forth a certain shine. But like Bapashtas, you drink wine, that your parnasa is through lending money, beribis. God forbid, a Jew is not allowed to do that, but we call that easy money. So when a person's livelihood is nikia v'kala kala, so then a machaya's face is shining. That you raise pigs, and that's a business that gives a lot of profit. In other words, she attributed the shining countenance to all gashmiistic things. Either you drink a lot of wine, or you loan money beribis, or megadli chazire. So Amar Lam. So when Rabbi Yehuda ben Abeloi heard that statement, he said regarding her, Tipach rucha dahi itza. May your spirit rot, because she doesn't have the capacity to look and to see the ruchnius. None of what she said is true by me. Begashmius. All of what she said is true to me. Beruchnius. Tachad the meilan klas milayo leislandi. Ella upanish chiyachli. What I do have is I learned Torah. And in the Torah, you have the Chamra Shel Torah, and then you have the concept of easy. There's a level of Torah that comes easily to him, and that is when a Yid is connected to God, because the behavior is okay. And then you have the concept of a lot of profit. These are all 3 levels of Torah learning that he had in his Torah, which is why the Torah gave his face that special shine. The Hachi Ksiv Chachmas Adam Torah Panav. And in contrast to that noble woman, that when she saw a person with a shining face, she right away connected to physical behavior. She was unable to see a deeper thing. In contrast, now we'll see Rabbi Bo came to Tefilla, and Chamonei Talmidoi de Rabbi Yochanan. When the students of Rabbi Yochanan met Rabbi Bo, they realized that Apay Nohoiden, that Rabbi Bo's face was shining. So Amrun, so they already knew it's shining from Torah. Why was it so much shining? They presumed that the Rabbi Bo discovered a new teaching. So Amrun Talmidim le Rabbi Yochanan, we met Rabbi Bo, and Sima, he found a treasure. Epis and Torah he found. And Rabbi Yochanan wanted to know what Torah did he find that gave him that shine. So also legabe Amar le my oiraisa chalato shamat. Not what easy business did you make? What new Torah did you learn? So Amar le, look, it's like a play of words. Chalato means new. He told him, I didn't find anything new. that Tosefta Atika actually had found a Tosefta, which is a work of Raisas that was ancient, that was unknown, and I discovered it. We're not looking for new. Forget, the new is superficial. I connected to the old. And Kari Alei Chachmas Adam Ta'ir Panov. Okay, Chavra, we'll stop over here. I wanted to get further, but now we're going to continue learning more about shiurim and how to determine, how do we determine how much is it a vias. Again, we had this in Avik Sachim, and we're going to have other mechanisms in the Yerushalmi, and we will also quote at the end the shiur of 2 by 2 by 2.7 to be continued. Good.
Sehr gut.
Very good.